In 2012, Tesla introduced the Model S, and in 2014 it came out to the UK. This was actually dubbed by many at the time as being the game changer for electric vehicles. Not only did it bring a pretty stylish exterior design and good use of technology within the cabin, but it also was the one that provided pretty high performance and a good electric range, at least at that time. Now in this video, we're just going to be talking about used electric vehicles. Should you actually buy them, the pros and cons, and being quite honest with you, there's a lot to talk about. Now I actually wanted to do this for almost a year, and sourcing a vehicle with a very high mileage was a bit tricky, but I reached out to Tesla and they actually provided me with this Model S, which is a 2015 90D with a whopping 260,000 miles on the clock, which is quite ridiculous for those people who live in the UK. That you'll know that is more mileage than you're probably ever going to encounter. Now this actually gave me a good benchmark to see about battery degradation, the servicing cost, the MOT history, and of course all the other things that go with it, from wear and tear and even the things that potentially might need to be changed. So hopefully this video will be useful, so let's just jump straight into it. So let's kick things off and talk about battery degradation, because this is something that's going to be really concerning anyone looking at a used electric vehicle. Now, of course, this is going to be very much dependent on to the battery pack that you're going for, the different vehicle, the battery technology that's been used over the years. But we're going to be taking this Tesla Model S 90D with 260 miles as a benchmark. Now, the vehicle had an EPA range of 285 miles, so not WLTP, which is mostly claimed. EPA is for those people who live in the US. Now, the manufacturer claims that you'll get roughly 230 to 245 miles now. That is with this current Tesla Model S, according to the instrument cluster. Now, what I can say over here is that equates to roughly 14% of battery degradation over the years, again in terms of quoted range. This would technically give you 20 years of driving at 10,000 miles a year. And that is apparently the average that most UK drivers actually do. In fact, even myself, take away me being a car journalist, when it comes to just me generally driving my own car, I don't actually even put in over 10,000 miles. But there will be some people that are doing 10,000 miles in a week, so bear that in mind. Now, in terms of my own mixed driving test, I actually netted 190 to 210 miles. Now, considering the Model S was one of the pioneers when it comes to electric range, then 190 to 210 miles, at least for my sake, would very much suit my needs. Now again, I appreciate that some people looking at certain used EVs and not looking at a Tesla will be potentially looking at vehicles with much lower range. I'm just thinking, for example, the original Nissan Leaf, well, that won't even get you around town, let alone going cross country. So just bearing that in mind, do look into the battery degradation. That is very important, and the only way that you can really tell as to how the battery is degraded is for you doing a long distance drive or potentially taking it on a regular test route or your general commute. Unfortunately, that's normally not the case if you're buying a used electric vehicle, because the manufacturer or, for example, the seller, be it private or business, are not going to let you have an extended loan of the vehicle. But nonetheless, when it comes to battery degradation on electric vehicles, at least from my experience of this Tesla Model S with high mileage, well, it's actually pretty good. Now, another thing to consider when it comes to battery degradation is charging. And by that I mean here, this vehicle has got a 90 kilowatt capacity or 85 kilowatt hour net. And if this capacity has been regularly recharged at a rapid rate via, let's say, DC rapid charger, like those that you find on the motorway, then here it means that the degradation of it is probably going to be higher. The reason I highlight this is because if, for example, the vehicle has done a lower mileage, or indeed is a vehicle that has got an owner that's a little bit more conscious for this, then they would have not gone to DC rapid chargers regularly. Of course, sometimes it's very much hard to avoid, because if you're doing longer journeys, then you're going to have to go to a DC rapid charger. Now, on that point, I would also like to mention that this vehicle very much has the original 90 kilowatt hour battery fitted. So I would just like to point that out of the way, because when you do look at its service history, the battery has been changed, but that is actually referring to the 12-volt battery. It's been changed twice, in case you're wondering. Now, elsewhere, when it comes to charging times, that's another thing that you might want to factor in, because here older generation EVs will have slower charging times, and in the case of the Model S, it has got a 120 kilowatt input, whereas modern Teslas go up to 250 kilowatts, which effectively means that you have to spend more time at a charger. If you use the adapter with this vehicle with a Tesla supercharger, you can go from 10 to 80% in roughly 40 minutes, which isn't that much longer than the modern Teslas, but still worth considering. As for its Type 2 port, it's got an 11 kilowatt onboard charger, and therefore means that you can go from 0 to 100% in 7 to 9 hours. Using a regular 7 kilowatt wall box, it will take you a little bit longer, while connecting up to a 3-pin input will take you over 30 to 40 hours. Now, the reason I mention all of this is because if you're looking at a used EV, there might be a high likelihood of you looking at an electric vehicle for the very first time. And therefore, they're all things that you should definitely factor in when it comes to making your decision. Equally over here, if you're looking at an electric vehicle, generally speaking, you're going to have to potentially rely on the public charging infrastructure, which is not always the best. But thankfully over here, if you're looking at, for example, a Tesla, you can rely on the Tesla supercharger network, which is the best out there in the world, let alone in the UK. You can look at the infotainment system and even do fantastic route planning directly via it. So again, just a nod towards having a Tesla, for example, specifically when it comes to the used car market, because it just takes away that overall range anxiety. Again, just re-emphasizing the fact that if you have got the ability of charging at home, then you might want to just do that, because then you're always set off with 100% charge. Now, there is also another topic I'd just like to quickly talk about, and that is performance. See, just generally speaking, EVs are quite rapid off the line. Sure, they're not exactly going to compete with petrol vehicles around the track, and if you're going to be really chucking it around and having that sort of lightweight feel, but when it comes to going in a straight line, they're absolutely rapid. Take this Tesla Model S 90D as an example. It's got 311 kilowatts of power, 417 horsepower. It's got 658 Newton meters of torque and an all-wheel drive configuration. I had it tested using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 1.38 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 2.04 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 4.57 seconds, and in case you're wondering, that is higher than the manufacturer's claim of 3.8 seconds, 50 to 70 miles an hour in 2.44 seconds, and a peak acceleration of 0.76 Gs with a top speed of 155 miles an hour. So yes, indeed, if you're putting your foot down from a standstill, you'll still get plenty of fun when you're driving an electric vehicle, at least in my opinion, because you've just got that instant amount of acceleration. I don't think a lot of people can say the same thing about a pretty old or very high mileage petrol or diesel car, but of course there'll be a few anomalies out there for those high performance vehicles that can still be found for a cheaper price. But again, I just want to highlight it in this video that there are out there certain EVs such as the Tesla Model S which will do a tremendous job, at least in a straight line. So moving on from all of that, what are the other things that you should consider? Well, there's of course the interior. That is of course on a case-by-case basis, and I don't really want to delve into it and spend too much time talking about it, because this Model S has actually been used and abused by the Tesla Supercharger Network team, in that it's been used as almost a van. So yes, it's been transporting goods. There's quite a lot of wear and tear that can be found around the cabin, and I'll be talking about the servicing element of it just very shortly. But when it comes to just buying a used vehicle, be it electric or not, you might want to look at certain aspects. For example, the infotainment system, which is normally quite pivotal on used electric vehicles. You might want to check the software that it's operating. Is it still receiving over-the-air updates? In this respect, the 17-inch portrait display, and therefore the infotainment system, is still receiving over-the-air updates from Tesla, which is absolutely fantastic on a vehicle that's almost 10 years old. Similarly here, the 12.3-inch instrument cluster, you might want to check to see if there are any black spots or any issues with it. So maybe go between certain menus and just check to see if everything's operating as it should. Equally, for example, the buttons, if they're present on the steering wheel, or the stalks, maybe just check to see if they're all operating and are indeed reacting as they should, because of course this might add to the overall servicing cost if you do own the vehicle, and indeed might give you an ability of negotiating a lower price with the dealer or the private seller. Now, on that note, I do love audio systems, and it would be actually quite criminal for me just to completely gloss over it. But in this respect, if you're going to be buying a car, maybe just go and test out the audio system in terms of do you like it or not, And more importantly, do the speakers actually work? Because some speakers might be blown out. They might not be actually connected. Maybe someone's retrofitted a different audio system, so they've taken out certain bits. Just go ahead and test it by pairing up your smartphone to the infotainment system, or indeed just going on an FM radio and just playing back some music, and then just go around the cabin and just listen out for the speakers. You can find some audio information looking online, or for example, if there's a vehicle that I've reviewed, then it'll be on the channel with some detailed breakdown of the speaker configuration. Now this actually brings me on to servicing, and before we actually delve into the differences of an electric vehicle with a regular petrol or diesel vehicle, there are certain general aspects that you might want to check yourself, or better still, if you've got someone who's a mechanic that can come with you to indeed inspect it, it might be something worth considering. So for example here, the tyre wear, the brake pads themselves, the suspension when you're going over speed bumps, does it make any sort of creaking sound, which might highlight potential issues over here? Then there are certain more aesthetic things that you might want to look at. For example, any sort of damage or rust, for example, that appears around wheel arches, or even in terms of the underbelly of the vehicle itself. So therefore, where is it being kept? Then you've also got things like, let's say, the electric tailgate that's present on this Model S. It actually makes a creaking sound each time it's opening and closing. Even the door handles, when they open and close, they have a little bit of a shunting sound. So these are all things that you might want to consider in terms of servicing it, and indeed there are certain aspects that you might want to test which will allow you to negotiate with the seller, and this will also allow you to calculate the cost of ownership. Now, what about the things that are actually more specific to an electric vehicle? Now, indeed, over here, for those people who are not aware, electric vehicles have got less moving parts than their internal combustion engine counterparts. And by that, I mean they haven't got a prop shaft or transmission, they don't have to worry about having an engine, and therefore means that effectively there's less things that can go wrong. But rather you have bigger things that can go wrong, and that is the electric motor or the motors, and indeed the battery pack. Now, the battery pack is the biggest talking point over here because it's quite a lot of unknown. There's things that you can't really inspect yourself, and even if you had a mechanic, well, they'll actually have to completely rip out the car, which is not something you can do, for example, at a dealership. In this respect, you'll just have to trust the seller. Now, in terms of the battery pack themselves, hopefully I've highlighted that battery degradation is generally not a problem on certain vehicles, for example, ones that are offered by Tesla. But you might want to consider looking at vehicles that have a used approved program, so for example, coming from the manufacturer themselves. In this respect, for example, Tesla certified pre-owned program is vehicles that are under 90,000 miles. They've got a 1-year warranty or 10,000 miles, whichever comes first, if the basic warranty has expired, and that is of 4 years and 50,000 miles. Then you'll still get a 8-year warranty or 150,000 miles and a minimum 70% battery capacity on the battery and the motors themselves. So that gives you a little bit more peace of mind of buying, for example, a Tesla. But what about when it comes to buying other vehicles out there? Well, you'll just have to do your research and look into the warranty policies that these manufacturers offer. And this will potentially give you a bit more peace of mind when it comes to the battery pack, because yes, I have also read some of the horror stories out there when people have bought electric vehicles and have had to replace the battery packs in their entirety. Then they've actually had to fork out an absolute massive bill, which pretty much completely negates the entire cost of the vehicle itself. Here there is also different programs by certain artisan replacement services that will actually replace certain cells within the battery pack, so not the entire thing, therefore really reducing the cost of the servicing of the battery pack. And again, that's something that you might want to research just generally for the vehicle that you're considering yourself. Now, it goes without saying that petrol and diesel vehicles also do have their things that you should consider. Here, it's not just with electric vehicles, because if I'm comparing a battery pack replacement or part of a battery pack replacement, that is the equivalent of changing the transmission, the gearbox, or, for example, the engine of a petrol or diesel vehicle. A lot of people will completely forget this, but this will actually set you back a pretty penny. Yes, indeed, some people can do this in their backyard, and indeed that won't be the case with an electric vehicle, but it still goes without saying that there are a lot of things to consider with a petrol and diesel vehicle as well that a lot of people actually forget about, because these are normally done incrementally. For example, you might change the Vanos on your BMW M3 and then change the gear selector later on, and then you might then have to look into looking at the prop shaft or even looking at the head gasket. All these things are actually quite big jobs, and when you do accumulate them all together, together, suddenly you might be racking up a bill of £5,000 to £10,000, depending on the power and the rarity of the vehicle. So yes, there are all considerations, and in this respect, if you're going to be comparing and contrasting an electric vehicle with a petrol or diesel vehicle, make sure you do kind of a fair comparison. Testing out a 400 horsepower Tesla with, let's say, a VW Golf won't make any sense. But then testing that and comparing that with, let's say, a BMW M3 or M5, then that would give you a bit more of a realistic comparison of the servicing costs that are associated with that BMW, and indeed something of an electric vehicle such as the Tesla Model S. But wait a second, there's something else that we should consider, and that is of course depreciation. Now this will affect any sort of car that comes out of a showroom, be it electric or not. As soon as you take the keys and you own it yourself and try and sell it on, generally speaking, you're going to lose a lot of money. There's certain use cases where that might not be the case. For example, if you're buying a classic used car that might appreciate over the years, or indeed certain highly sought after cars, for example, the Porsche GT3 RS, here it'll be actually easier to sell on after you've actually got your hands on it and make money on it, even though you've still used it. But that is actually quite rare to find. Now, when it comes to electric vehicles, they've actually gotten a really bad reputation in this department, because certain cars that are only a couple of years old and only have, let's say, 10 to 20,000 miles on the clock have lost a whopping £50,000. And here I'm talking about the Porsche Taycan or the Audi e-tron GT. It's actually been really well documented for those people who are aware, and therefore means that's something that really does put off a lot of people, because let's say if you're buying a new car and you want to sell it on in a couple of years' time, you'll be losing a lot of money to the point where it doesn't really make sense. Now, for a used EV, that's potentially not as bad, but it's still a definite consideration. If you're buying a 10-year-old petrol or diesel vehicle, the depreciation will be less than a used electric vehicle. Now let's take this Tesla Model S as an example and a bit of a benchmark to just kind of share you my experiences. Here, the vehicle was originally £50,000. That is with a £5,000 plug-in grant. Yes, those things used to exist. Now, the vehicle itself has been valued at £4,000 to £6,000. This is because of the high mileage and also the wear and tear. However, if you look at the used car market, you'll find Tesla Model S's at 2015 that can be found between £10,000 to £18,000. I'm sure there's a bit cheaper and a bit more expensive alternatives out there depending on the condition and the wear and tear and the mileage that they have. But if we take £12,000 as a price of a 2015 Tesla Model S, that gives it a depreciation of £38,000 or £3,800 a year, because the car is roughly 10 years old, or a whopping 76% of depreciation. Now, of course, that's going to be a lot higher than a petrol or diesel vehicle. And in this respect, should you be buying a used electric vehicle when it comes to depreciation? Well, in all honesty, I would say that if you're owning it in the short term, then probably not. If you're owning it in terms of the long term, and therefore you're going to be able to benefit from charging it at home, for example, or indeed having lower service costs, and indeed just enjoying the benefits of an electric vehicle being quieter and just a lot more rapid and fun to drive, at least in a straight line, then here the electric vehicle will make more sense when it comes to depreciation. Now, this will be for you to calculate, to work out the vehicle that you're looking at the trends of the market, and also considering potentially new technology that's coming out when it comes to battery tech, and therefore vehicles will have maybe better range, and therefore means that the current state of electric vehicles might actually depreciate even further or at a quicker rate, because the overall electric range that these vehicles offer are not that great. In the Tesla Model S, hopefully I've highlighted the battery degradation is actually not a big deal, and also certain Model S's can even be found with free supercharging. So yes, that's lifetime free supercharging, and you'll just never have to worry about it, which is a massive selling point. At least for someone like myself, I would think that that's actually pretty good. Again, this will all very much depend on a case-by-case basis, but definitely depreciation is a big topic and something that you'll have to calculate for yourself. Now, to conclude, I would like to talk about insurance costs, because here this is something that's going to affect anyone and everyone buying a vehicle, be it new or used, but particularly when it comes to buying used EV, here certain vehicles will cost higher to insure in comparison to their identical petrol or diesel counterparts. And this is namely due to the fact that the insurance providers don't exactly have as much of a larger pool to go by in terms of use cases, and therefore have added a premium to EVs. And of course, there's also that always underlining question about the battery pack, as I highlighted before. Now, nonetheless, over here, it's worth comparing a cost of a car that is a petrol or diesel and has the same amount of power in comparison to the EV that you're looking at, and then going to your insurance provider and giving the registration numbers, or indeed just going via comparison websites and just getting some quotes. This is again just a factor into the cost of the ownership of the electric vehicle, and therefore is something that you should certainly look into before actually making the plunge. So with all that in mind, should you buy a used electric vehicle? Well, hopefully this video has provided you all the pros and cons that you need to have in order to make your own informed decision. I know there's been a bit of an extreme case, at least for those of us who live in the UK, with a car that has over 260,000 miles on the clock, but nonetheless here hopefully some of the big topics have been covered, such as the likes of depreciation to servicing, and even in terms of the general ownership of an electric vehicle versus a regular petrol or diesel. Now I'd be curious to know if you would pick a used electric vehicle, or of course if you've already purchased one, down in the comment section below. And if you have enjoyed this independent video, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification. All of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.